The limits!
Godlike!
Magic lies in the mind.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's been a really long time since I've been here, and probably the same for you. I have something special for you guys today, and it's a WAN WAN guide. I've been working on this recently, and just wanted to mention that this whole workflow is 100% done on my phone, so hopefully that'll help me with the output of videos and, you know, just in general speed and editing and all that. So, yeah. Anyways, let's go ahead and, first of all, a little disclaimer. Finding gameplays for this video in the current meta is extremely difficult because WAN WAN is not in a good spot in the meta right now. She's getting a couple buffs, but maybe not enough. So yeah, let's get some formalities out of the way though, and just in case you didn't see from the video title, if you're expecting a typical tips and tricks and a basic hero kit maneuver video, then please search up any WAN WAN guide on YouTube. There are plenty of other people out there who have spent a lot of time and effort into making those videos, and I would definitely recommend those, especially if you're starting out new to WAN WAN. But over here on my channel, we're going to divide the video into a couple of different parts. Number one is personal tips for WAN WAN that are probably not recommended anywhere else. This will include everything from what battle spells I use and why, as well as how I managed to use her in this meta where she is not in a very good spot at the moment. It will also include overall macro plays with WAN WAN and what build pathing and gold efficiency mean for WAN WAN users. The second part will be how to increase your overall chances of success and obviously your win rate with WAN WAN by learning how to draft properly in solo queue, duo queue, trio queue, and of course 5-man rank. Now, this carries a grain of salt because this part is not necessarily like just for WAN WAN, but you can kind of use it for other heroes too, so maybe just a little bit extra there, but in this case we're going to apply that logic to WAN WAN. The third part of the video will be explaining the two different build paths for WAN WAN and which one to take for people that are new to WAN WAN as well as for those that are a little bit more experienced users. The fourth part of the video will be recommended hero partners for WAN WAN, heroes that synergize well with her in kits. And of course, the fifth part is the shoutouts to the loyal subs that are still on Discord, and we'll go through those eventually. Now the sixth part is the final part, and I'm going to go through how I would deal with every hero in the game using WAN WAN currently, based on personal experience. At least I thought. Now, I honestly plan to make a separate video for this, so I'm only going to explain two heroes and then a little bit about other heroes in general that will get you kind of the gist of everything. And if you guys want to see the over 100 heroes in ML and how to deal with every single one using WAN WAN, then that'll be a separate video for sure, because this one's going to be pretty long. Alright, so let's dive into my personal tips for WAN WAN and why they are so important to me in my experience in playing her. If you are new to WAN WAN, I need to remind you that in the current meta of when this video was posted, WAN WAN is still not sitting very well due to the sheer amount of burst and immune heroes that are currently in the meta. I would personally not bring her to Classics right now unless I have a team that is willing to support me until I learn how to play her. So with that little disclaimer out of the way, let's start talking about boots. Most builds will have you take the Swift boots for WAN WAN. This is kind of like standard for most people, and this is an item that gives you movement speed and attack speed. Since attack speed affects the interval between WAN WAN's hops, how fast you can hop, and obviously how fast you can attack, you would tend to believe that this is a very important item. However, I would recommend you not build this item ever on WAN WAN unless you plan to take her as a jungler, and this is only because boots are required if you're a jungler. Also, I don't recommend jungling with WAN WAN, he's kinda bad at it. Another point I want to touch on is the battle spell for WAN WAN. I personally do not use anything but AAGs. However, it doesn't mean I didn't try out Inspire or Flicker for WAN WAN in all my matches I've played with her. I did. It's because I've tried it already that I can see the appeal in both Inspire and Flicker. Inspire can make up for WAN WAN's garbage early game, and Flicker can help you obtain your ult easier versus enemies that always try to avoid giving you your last weakness. They both have their strong points, but AAGs makes late game WAN WAN safer. In my opinion, late game as a marksman should be the one thing carrying your team, not being a burden. And for me, This is almost impossible if I do not bring Aegis on Wan Wan. Now, since Wan Wan has been out for a long time, and I am assuming you have at least a basic understanding of how she works, I want to talk about how to actually play Wan Wan, but I am not referring to the mechanics of how to pull off your ultimate in teamfights or anything like that. I'm talking about macro plays with Wan Wan. The short definition for the term macro plays in Mobile Legends refers to everything you are doing in the game before the match actually starts, as well as during the match when you are not involved in actual brawls or teamfights. So basically, the other 90% of the game. This includes rotations, ganks, build paths, amongst other things such as map or lane control or pressure, depending on what term you are more used to. The reason that you should worry about having good macro with Wan Wan, who is arguably a very difficult micro hero as well, is because her early game is absolutely garbage compared to other marksmen in the game. Also, the number one thing you need to keep in mind is map awareness. Know where your enemies are at, not just the person you are fighting in the lane. This will always help you in determining how aggressive you can be early game, how much you can dive into enemy territory mid game, and how to weave around enemies late game to reach your targets. Let's review these 3 scenarios that are likely for Wan Wan and let you adjust accordingly once you actually go out to the battlefield and try her out. Scenario number 1. Wan Wan is dominating the lane. When you are dominating a lane with Wan Wan, you want to try and get as many tower hits in for extra gold. What this does is it allows you to keep an upper advantage over your enemy. However, if the enemy has heavy, long-range burst skills or you are too low in HP to safely hit the tower, and you need to recall, then there's 2 ways to safely do this. If you have a minion wave already hitting the tower, and you know no one is out to try and kill you, recall in the edge of the brush closest to the enemy tower. Your minions' damage while they hit the tower will count as extra gold for you, regardless. You can also follow this tip if you do not want to recall but want to remain hidden from the minimap for the enemies. You know, just in case you're being extra cautious. The second way to recall when you are dominating a lane is by recalling in the bush behind your tower. If you recall this way, you will have a safer time escaping enemy ganks from tanks that are waiting for you to be caught off guard, and you want to maintain that dominating position as much as possible. Scenario number 2, a stalemate lane. This is what happens most of the time. When you are even in a lane against your enemy, then all you have to do is maintain very high map awareness, especially if you are alone. Since the enemy knows they cannot commit to killing you without dying themselves, and they know that you are in the same situation, then try not to overstep your limits and give the enemies the advantage. They will most likely ask for backup, and then you will get yanked by 4 people. This is common for Wan Wan because you're squishy and a marksman, and you're probably not level 4 yet. But you should have your Aegis ready, and you should have your skill 1 up. Please do not burn your skill 2 for extra mobility, because if the enemy has a hard crowd control hero, or even worse, a chain of crowd control, you will get caught with skills in cooldown, and you will die. Your most powerful weapon against an enemy who has equal laning power to you is your first skill. If you do not land the stun on the skill, you will most likely die. Remember, when the tables are equal, the enemy will try to tip the balance. They will try to take your crab, and you will try to take theirs. My advice here is to try to disrupt them from taking the crab as much as possible, but don't get baited. And farm other jungle creeps if your jungler is in the completely opposite lane and there's no chance of them coming near anytime soon. Oh, and final tip for this second scenario also applies to the next scenario. So before you completely commit to killing the enemy in your lane, make sure of the following things: that there will be no one else around you by checking the nearby brush with S1, that your damage will kill the enemy for sure, that you can survive until your ultimate can activate no matter how the enemy will maneuver around you, and that they will be unlikely to escape. Failure to complete all these conditions will give the enemies the advantage in the lane that they needed over you. Scenario number 3, Wan Wan is losing the lane. Now for scenario number 3, this is probably the worst one, when you're losing the lane as Wan Wan. This can happen quite often when you are facing ranged enemies paired by a tank. A great example of this would be heroes like Clint, Layla, Brody, or Leslie, who have a Tigreal or a Kufra protecting them. When you know that you will be facing enemies like this, you need to play super safe and hug your tower. Try to give the enemy as few hits in on you as possible, and just grit your teeth until your jungler rotates to your lane. This scenario can also happen when you are being focused by the entire enemy team, and your team is too busy in the opposite lane. This scenario can also happen when you face enemies that directly counter you. such as Hayabusa or Phobius, who are extremely difficult to beat with Wan Wan, especially early game, because again, that's when she's garbage. In these cases, it is best to know what the enemy hero wants you to do, and then try not to do it. In Hayabusa's case, he wants you to not clear the minion wave so that he can cast ultimate under your tower and then kill you without his ultimate spreading to nearby minions, and without the tower targeting him first. In Phobius' case, he just wants to catch you dashing outside of your tower and poke you as much as possible so he can kill you, and tower dive for that. In each case, you know what your enemy needs to do to beat you. Try to not give them what they want. Remember, it's better to lose a tower if you have to, than lose your life. Once your tower is destroyed, the enemy pressure on you will fall dramatically, and you can focus on regaining your items and gold. Speaking of gold, let's move on to another very important thing for Wan Wan, due to just how nerfed she is right now. Gold efficiency and build pathing. The two go hand in hand. Gold efficiency simply means you are not wasting your gold buying items that you will sell later, such as Windtalker, and that you are always making sure that you have very few moments where you are just standing there, not trying to gain gold in any way possible. As for build pathing, well, this one's a bit more difficult, and we'll come back to that point later on exactly how to do the correct build path for your Wan Wan playstyle. For now, I want to move on to something that I think is a bit more important than build pathing, and this would be drafting. But since drafting is a skill that doesn't necessarily apply to Wan Wan, and a lot of you may click out of the video at this point, I'll hand you guys another Wan Wan trick from her secret arts book. Then we'll come back to drafting, but we still have to do drafting, please. Just stick with me. Next trick in the Wan Wan agenda is targeting, and you probably aren't using the ideal settings for her. Pay attention to the screenshot shown on your screen right now. These are Wan Wan's best settings, and they are super important. Now, I already know the skeptics are out there worried about, but if you ult, won't the ultimate just lock on to the closest hero? And what if that's a tank? Relax, relax. Just let me show you. When you select closest targeting on Wan Wan, she will obviously hit the closest target to her. This closest targeting system does not differentiate between minions, creeps, or enemy heroes. However, it can be overridden by the hero lock system, which a lot more of you should be familiar with. Hero lock by itself is a double-edged sword for Wan Wan for the following reasons. The hero locked on by Wan Wan exceeds her auto attack range. This causes Wan Wan to instead walk towards that target instead of using her passive. In certain scenarios, this can kill you, since you need to keep jumping to strafe around enemies. This is why I prefer the closest targeting. As you can see though, switching auto-lock targets in the middle of a team fight, while also trying to stay alive and break weaknesses, can be extremely challenging and very impractical. This is why I use the basic attack smart targeting feature. It is a feature that is an extension of the hero lock feature. When you drag your attack button in the direction of an enemy hero, the hero lock will switch to the enemy in said direction. Other people online have completely dismissed this feature, saying that it requires too precise aim to actually work. But if you're watching the screen right now, you should be seeing me use my little Zilong practice ring for maneuvering and switching targets. I think the hardest part about this system is what I'm showing you on screen right now. That once you get into the melee range of an enemy in front of you, if your targeting is past them, it will lock onto the targeting past them. You can solve this with a lot of practice by not dragging so far out, but again, that needs a lot of practice. As for how often I actually use this feature on Wan Wan and get my ults, I would say I use this in about 15% of my games, where enemies like to stay spread apart and not all collapse on me. It takes a long time to get used to the smart targeting feature, but it can get rid of a lot of annoying targeting problems for Wan Wan in the long run, and even more as you gain experience with her. Oh, and remember, her ultimate will always lock on to the next lowest HP person, regardless of your settings or hero locks. Alright, so are you ready for the drafting rant? Honestly, you can apply the drafting tips for any hero, not just Wan Wan, but if you don't know how to draft and you want to improve your win rates or chances of winning when taking Wan Wan, or any other hero for that matter, you need to come to terms with the fact that you will not always be able to pick your hero, and you need to adjust for the sake of the game. It can be frustrating at times because you really want to grind a hero, but grinding a hero through a proper drafting method is more rewarding to you and your teammates in the long run, and your win rate will thank you. So let's get the question of what exactly is drafting to you, Zero, out of the way. For me, drafting is what you would consider an out-of-battlefield skill and requires you to know a lot about what heroes counter you and what heroes you counter. But it goes deeper than that, and it applies not just to yourself, but also your enemies and your allies. So if you want to increase your win rate, or chances of success with Wan Wan in this meta, or any meta therefore, you need to learn how to draft, and you need a backup hero. The things that heroes like Wan Wan are weak to are not necessarily the same things heroes like Clint or Brody are weak to. So personally for me, if I have to take the marksman role, I usually end up taking Clint as a replacement marksman for Wan Wan, provided there's enough counters on the enemy team for Wan Wan. Alright, let's dig into this. It will be long-winded, it will be painful, but it will help you choose Wan Wan when she has better chances of success at the end of the day. The drafting tips will be given for solo queue first, then for duo queue, trio queue, and finally 5-man drafting. 5-man drafting is a bit more complicated, especially since you shouldn't be focusing the draft around Wan Wan, but if you wish to include her in your comps, I do have some tips for you. Okay, first things first. In solo queue, remember that it's not about not trusting anyone. It's about giving your best no matter what. And that may sound cringy, but pay attention from the very beginning at what your allies want to play, their win rates, and who they ban. If you see slot 5 ban Eudora and say they want to pick Hanabi with a 56% win rate, then let them take Hanabi. They're probably not bad, you need to adjust, since they are highly likely to not adjust themselves. If you see slot 5 ban a hero that is currently not banned in the meta, and they want to pick a Hanabi with a 56% win rate, then you need to get ready to adjust, for sure, because that person is likely not up to date with the current meta and will end up feeding in the game and hurting your overall win rate if you still go through and lock your Wan Wan. When you encounter these kinds of people, you need to determine a couple of crucial things. First, does your team have someone who is willing to jungle? This is crucial because if they don't, you will need to fill this role first and foremost. Second of all roles is the roamer role. Does your team have someone who is willing to roam? This is the second most important role in the game. They control the flow of rotations and ganks for the whole match. A good jungler can only go as far as their roamer takes them. The third most important thing is to look at what heroes the enemy is picking. If the enemy got their hands on, for example in this meta, Saber or Harley, then you know that A, your jungler is probably screwed, B, your roamer probably can't handle the Saber or Harley, C, you are the jungler and you need to adjust for that Saber or Harley pick, or D, you are the roamer and you need to adjust for the Saber or Harley pick. In all cases, you can see that all your moves have to be taken to put the enemy in the worst position possible for them. I would personally recommend a hero pool of Kaja, Ruby, Sylvana, Veil, Kagura, Hayabusa, Yi Sunshin, and Hanzo. If you want to pick Wan Wan, but then you're forced to adjust, if you have these heroes in your hero pool, you will have a way easier time in solo queue, trust me. Okay, so please bear with me. I just had to make sure you knew how to handle the worst case scenario in solo queue. Now, if your circumstances are a bit different, and you see that the enemy isn't going crazy or that your allies are actually pretty decent, and no one wants to go marksman, then it is your time to shine. Just make sure that you try to get last pick, if your jungler was not a priority pick hero. If not, try to leave that last slot to your jungler. Slot 4 or 5 are the best for you. The reason people do this is so the enemy team can't counter the last pick as easily as the first pick. A good example of this is, you show your Wan Wan, and then you get traded first pick. What will naturally happen is that the enemy will probably pick Phoveus and Khufra. You don't want this, because now the game is going to be super difficult if not impossible for you. In a similar fashion, your jungler doesn't want that to happen to him or her, because they have their own counters as well. But since you are not the jungler, your priority comes in second place. This is why you see the meta roamer picks usually being picked first. If you do this right, you won't be facing Phoveus, Hayabusa, Natalia, Lolita, Khufra, or any other cancer counter heroes to Wan Wan from the start. At worst, you'll be facing one counter, and you should be able to handle that. Maybe even 2. Alright, moving along to duo queue tips. But I think the following phrase will apply to trio as well. As long as there's randoms in your team, don't forget that adjusting is important and sometimes necessary unless you want to force your pick and then risk your win rates. Anyways, duo queue, right? So in duo, there's really 3 scenarios. 2 of them are when you get matched with a trio. If the trio is dominant, they will show their picks in advance and usually take over Hyper, Mid, and Roam. If the trio is not dominant, they will leave either Hyper or Roam open. Since the scenario of a dominant trio doesn't really affect your choice to pick Wan Wan, You can follow the previous advice to try to get her close to last pick and let your duo partner adjust the pick to whatever is missing in the team. Make no mistake, someone still has to adjust, but it was your valiant friend that did it, just so you could play Wan Wan. But what if the trio isn't dominant? It's actually not that bad. You still have a high chance of picking Wan Wan. Your partner may have to fill the carrier or roamer role, but he was already going to fill anyways, right? The worst that can happen here is that the not dominant trio will pick a marksman hero. Don't do the double marksman with Wan Wan, please. I think the final scenario for this is 3 solo players and your duo, but another duo and 1 extra solo player also exists. The same advice will technically go here. Try to make your partner be the flex pick, and if someone takes over the marksman role, or the enemy begins to take way too many counters, then don't pick Wan Wan, please. Stop it. Get some help. You know, I thought I was going to struggle a bit more in explaining all this drafting stuff, but honestly, it was the solo queue part that was the most difficult, because that mentality carries on to other draft modes, and when you play with friends that are willing to take the flex roles, it gets way easier to actually be able to pick Wan Wan in ranked and win. So if you're the trio, the best thing your team can do is to take the dominant trio position and go ahead and show your heroes right after the ban phase, but do not leave it so that the randoms can trade you Wan Wan, only as a pre-selection. You don't want them switching your Wan Wan in the second or first slot. Remember, your friends need to try and take the jungler and roamer role. Personally, I would recommend your jungler pick to be a hybrid flex pick. That means that the hero that they pick for jungler role is someone who can switch between XP lane and jungle, just in case you get a stubborn player that forces their jungle pick on you guys. Speaking of which, if that does happen to you, try to adjust your roamer pick to something that can rotate a bit faster, because a random taking over the jungle is almost never a good sign for your trio. This only leaves me to talk about the 5-man draft now. I could make a whole separate video on this, so I will offer the most condensed version here, and only refer to 5-man tips for a team that wants to include Wan Wan. In the world of 5Q, covering each other's weaknesses with other heroes exists, and when a hero has very few weaknesses in the current meta, it determines their pick priority. If you learn how to draft properly, you can force the enemy to take heroes that will not counter Wan Wan, but may counter your core. So I will suggest you 2 different team comps for Wan Wan in 5Q, and you can flex the picks according to what your allies can play. Team comp number 1. First pick is yours. Ban Harley, Xborg, and Natalia for the current meta, then take Phoveus, Kadita, Johnson, Zilong, Ling, and Wan Wan. The order would be Phoveus first, Kadita and Johnson, Zilong or Ling, and then Wan Wan. Now the same team comp, but second pick is yours. The same bans apply, but this time you take Phoveus and Johnson first, then Kadita and Wan Wan, and then your final pick will be Zilong or Ling. The second team comp, with first pick being yours, would be Diggy, then Baxia and Nana, Harith and Wan Wan, and Baxia would go offlane. Now if the second pick is yours for the second team comp, then same bans, Harley, Xborg, and Phoveus, but this time you would have to take Diggy and Baxia first, Nana and Harith second, and then finally pick the Wan Wan. A bonus cancer comp, and please only do this if you just want to mess with the enemy's draft and just cause them to have brain lag. Take Aldous and Johnson, Wan Wan and Zilong, and then Farsa, or Aldous first, then Johnson and Wan Wan, then Zilong and Farsa, depending on first or second pick. Due to just how much more I have to say, if you want me to explain how these comps work, I can, but I will not mention it in this video. We have more important things to discuss here for Wan Wan. Let's try to make this as smooth as possible though. Continuing on from any draft really, once all the heroes are selected, you have your first chance to see what types of enemies you will be facing, and this will affect your item build order for Wan Wan, which means which items you will prioritize for her. Before I get into build paths, make sure you're taking the proper emblem for Wan Wan. One of these is for pure attack speed, and the other is for critical damage. More on that later. We'll talk about pure attack speed first, which is the Corrosion Scythe based build path. The base you see across the screen right now refers to what you should buy early game, and is the most critical thing to do to maximize your gold efficiency on Wan Wan. Remember, her early game is the worst, so the faster you can get out of the early game, the faster you can become a reliable source of damage for your team. If you noticed, there are no boots in any of these builds. This is because buying boots on Wan Wan is extremely, and I emphasize, extremely, gold inefficient. You're basically wasting gold when you buy boots on Wan Wan. The only time you should buy boots on Wan Wan is when you are jungling, and that's only because you're forced to purchase them as a jungling item. But Zero, if you want a lot of attack speed early game, why not just get Windtalker like everybody else? Well, that's because Windtalker costs 1870 gold for 40% attack speed. Yes, I am aware of the other properties it has, relax. But I would rather spend 1680 gold and have 60% attack speed on Wan Wan early game, and then build that into actual items. Think about it. Okay, back to the build path for a Corrosion Scythe based build for Wan Wan. I would personally recommend this for 95% of Wan Wan players, because it has a high base attack speed, and because it only takes 3 basic attacks to proc all of Corrosion Scythe's passive once you buy Golden Staff. It also has the appropriate amount of magic defense, so you don't get one-shot by heroes like Eudora, Harley, or Vale. And at the same time, it makes use of Wind of Nature, so that burst assassins can't kill you easily. I add Aegis on top, because Wan Wan is still too squishy until she gets these items. With that being said though, if you look at the path labeled as Ideal, you can see that we immediately go for Golden Staff right after DHS. Once again, because it raises the stacks on Corrosion super fast and it makes you very mobile very quickly. After the Golden Staff, we immediately go for the Wind of Nature because this is our final attack speed item and it adds that double enhanced survival function. Due to the current meta, Athena's Shield is next, but if you fight enemies with only a support like Angela or Estes as their only source of magic damage, Rose Gold Meteor can fill the slot Athena's Shield has right now. Just a quick FYI. We obviously will have issues killing off enemies with very high defense, and that's why Malefic Roar is a necessary item late game on Wan Wan.
We need Armor Pen first, then we need Athena's for the Farsa, because if I don't have that, she can just kill me with two nukes. But I'm not gonna have it before, Lord, that's impossible. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, I need Athena's.
Okay, seems reasonable, Zero, but the only thing that changed for the P/M and the M/P is the order in which you got Athena's or Wind of Nature. You are 100% correct. In both cases, we forsake the benefit that Golden Staff brings us in terms of reaching max attack speed fast in order to achieve max survivability. You would build into the middle P/M build when facing high burst enemy physical heroes such as Clint or Bruno paired with a jungler such as Ling or Hayabusa. If the enemy does not have high magic burst damage, when you go down the middle path, remember to substitute Rose Gold in there. It really is nice, but Athena's Shield's damage resistance is unbeatable when the enemy has a really good burst mage. Speaking of which, that's the build path on the far right, where we rush Athena's Shield. This might all seem useless info to you, but it can really help the newer players to Wan Wan know that if they are fighting heroes such as Eudora on the enemy team, that they just need to rush these items. Make no mistake, the damage spike comes in 3 tiers or 3 stages for Wan Wan. The mobility base happens with Corrosion. Your damage spike number 1 will happen when you get DHS. The second is when you get Golden Staff, and your third is when you get Malefic Roar. However, in my experience in playing Wan Wan, delaying your damage spikes for more survivability is more important overall to the game than rushing the ideal path and then getting one shot by Eudora or Vale. The logic is, yes, my damage may reach 5,000 per second, but you don't even have the time to cause that damage in the first place. Your skill 2 is just 1 Purify, and enemies that know how to play against Wan Wan will bring crowd control chains or just pure raw burst damage. Now, if you're already a long-time user of Corrosion Scythe for Wan Wan, but you, like me, just hate the fact that Wan Wan just doesn't compare to other marksmen late game in terms of damage, and you need a viable solution before you go crazy, well then let me show you the critical damage version of Wan Wan. Remember, you need the critical damage emblem for this. You're being given extra critical damage here, so you better take it. Massive disclaimer here. If you are not very experienced with using Wan Wan in difficult situations, this build path, this whole critical damage concept, is not for you. You will feed. Why? With the Corrosion Scythe and Golden Staff build, kiting, maneuvering around enemies, everything in general is much easier. because that build has more attack speed than this build. The price you pay for that is a bad damage output late game. As for this build, well, if you can deal with the fact that you are not allowed to make as much mistakes as before, then this build will outclass the Corrosion based build in damage, and it packs a heavier punch early game, mid game, late game, overall than Corrosion Scythe. Like, seriously, a way stronger punch. So I've told you the risks already. So let's talk about why it works briefly, and then go down the build path logic. The flex items, Athena's Shield, Wind of Nature, and Malefic Roar, are still there. It's literally the same build as the Corrosion based one. So can two items, Scarlet Phantom and Berserker's Fury, really make Wan Wan better than Corrosion Scythe and Golden Staff? The answer is yes. Yes it does. It makes a huge difference. For the base build here, you will get 40% attack speed and 20% critical chance. Again, cheaper than Windtalker, but better. This builds right into Scarlet and then DHS. With these two items alone, the only bad factor is that you're relying on landing crits to get that extra attack speed from Scarlet Phantom. But may the RNG be with you. Ideally, you would want to get Berserker's Fury, not just for the huge damage boost, but because of the extra crit chance it has, so you don't have to rely as hard on RNG Lords for now, and just kill enemies easier. Remember that your basic attacks will cause a lot of damage. And this is great because if you ult an enemy and then your ultimate locks on to the next target, since your ult can crit, the enemy will have a huge chunk of their HP missing, way more than if you had used Corrosion Scythe. It might even kill them actually. Now, we still need more attack speed. This is not enough, but at the same time, we can't just drop Wind of Nature, it's too good. The same logic applies to Athena's Shield right here. If there isn't enough magic damage on the enemy team, get Rose Gold. And finally, buy Malefic Roar. I actually played a lot of games with BOD instead, since it goes well with her ultimate, but the damage differential was not as much as I expected, especially late, and therefore I just stuck with Malefic for better overall damage. P/M burst build path can replace Athena's with Rose Gold again, provided not enough enemy magic damage. And of course, if there's too much, you need to rush Athena's using the M/P burst path. These stand for Physical P and Magical M. In all my games on Wan Wan, I can probably count on my hands the times the enemy didn't bring both forms of burst. When they didn't, they got completely annihilated because I either went Athena's with Rose Gold or Wind of Nature and Rose Gold. It's great. Again, just remember, critical damage is the best for Wan Wan right now, but it requires a heavy amount of experience. Just use Corrosion build until you're comfortable playing Wan Wan in every scenario. Mobility and survival has to be your core reflexes for Wan Wan, and on that core, you can build your more risky builds, such as the critical damage build. Of course, this is a 5v5 MOBA, and just in case I didn't make it clear with all the drafting tips, you won't always be able to play Wan Wan. I wish I could too, but it's just not the case. Playing with friends made it way easier to pick her, but just making your friends fill in without any kind of synergy can also be kind of counterproductive. So I will put on the screen a tier list of sorts for heroes that synergize well with Wan Wan, and this will help you in draft too, making you feel better when your allies take these heroes. You can pause the video here and take a look if you want, or you can download the files, link in the description, for your convenience. I think the things I need to mention here is that this list is without keeping the current meta in regard. It does not mean that right now they are not good or bad in the meta, just that if you have these heroes in your team, it will make your synergy with Wan Wan better. A great example of this right now is Export. Right now he's in a great place in the meta, but in terms of synergy in his kit with Wan Wan, it is cringe at best. This doesn't mean your friend shouldn't take Export if they don't want to, because he is meta, but just that you shouldn't expect any kind of synergy between the two kits of these heroes. We are nearing the end of the guide finally, but before you go, I want to mention two more things. One of them doesn't really relate to Wan Wan, so you can skip it if you want to, and the other is a preview for an upcoming video, provided enough people want to see it. Alright, so I'm going to send out a bunch of virtual hugs to all of my subs that are still on Discord or YouTube, and that, you know, just stuck around because they wanted to hang out. Needless to say that once I'm back to YouTube, keeping it up will be a challenge, but then at the same time, if I'm doing this because I want to, with the content that I want to make, then I can do it. I got some shoutouts coming up, so if you tag me, your screenshot should be popping up pretty soon. I pinged everyone to drop their Wan Wan questions, but I think only Shadow was actually curious about anything. So I think I answered all the questions that were asked here just by the nature of the video. But still, thanks for being here, guys. Okay, the final showdown. A preview into a video I can make, or not. It's up to y'all. This is a tier list for Wan Wan's current counters in Mobile Legends. I will explain how to deal with the top two, Phoveus and Lolita, and then mention more broad mechanics that other heroes have and why that places them in the difficult tier. Okay, we all know Phoveus was released specifically to counter Wan Wan. He does too much damage, he has too much... Just kidding. But seriously, if you want to main Wan Wan, this guy is a valid ban. If you play Corrosion Scythe Wan Wan, this guy will make you completely invalid the whole game. You will find no way to counter him. As for critical build users, you have to rely on the power of your basic attacks. You will almost die, but just remember that you can actually beat this thing in a 1v1. The trick is to try to use up all of your skills without dashing. So once he jumps on you, don't move. Just basic attack him until he dies, and stop attacking when he goes out of your auto attack range. If you attack when he goes out of your auto attack range, you're going to jump. That's what he wants. You can use the recall button to stop Wan Wan from dashing when he tries to range bait you. Phoveus will land 3 or 4 successful jumps on you at most if you follow this. 1 from being in his range, 2nd from his 2nd skill, and 3rd from flame shot if he has it. The 4th may not apply unless you just got unlucky. Basically, if you have to dash one last time to break that final weakness, make sure you spam click ultimate, so that even if he teleports, it will not damage you. If you ult him and you see his health isn't dropping like a fly, or if he has over 80% health when you even use your ult, then start going backwards as soon as you ult. Keep doing this maneuver all game when you fight him. What will happen early game is that you will probably die. Mid game, there's a good chance you might win or just survive. And then late game, you should destroy him easily. This obviously gets way harder to do in team fights, but if you want to kill something in a team fight, Aegis and Athena's shield will last long enough for you to proc your ultimate and then kill your target. You just might die afterwards from Phoveus attacks. That's why it's better to ban him or take him on your team. Lolita is also sort of cancer for Wan Wan, and trust me, it's worthy of a ban. It's nowhere as complicated as Phoveus, but you have only one way to deal with Lolita users. Use your skill 1 after she uses her shield, because otherwise it's useless. And work in between those cooldowns around Lolita. When she ults, this is her greatest weakness, so if you want to stop her ult, cast your S1 at her, and your stun will stop her ultimate. That's about all you can do. And since your S1 is your form of engagement and navigation basically, using S1 when Lolita has her S1 up is useless. So, alright, the rest of the heroes here in the difficult tier, if you notice, a lot of them are meta right now. And I think I can classify the majority of the rest of the heroes into 4 groups: crowd control chains, immunity skills, burst, and summon heroes. Crowd control chains apply to heroes like Kufra, or combinations of heroes like Ruby, Lo Yi, and Saber. These counter your single Purify by just chaining crowd control around you. Immunity skill heroes are also really annoying. Heroes like Lancelot, Ling, Hanzo all disappear from the map temporarily, and during those frames where they are not there, they stop your mobility by giving you no passive, which means no dash. Burst heroes are equally cancer, such as Kaja, Zilong, Alucard, and Clint. Heroes that don't give you enough time to react and proc your defenses. And of course, we have the summon heroes. Heroes that can hide in their ultimates, like Zask, or summon multiple body doubles, like Sun, can be hard to fight with Wan Wan, so it's best to keep your distance from them. If you're new to Wan Wan, I would say that you should take this list with a grain of salt and change it a little bit. Consider everything in the difficult tier as direct counters to you, and be extra cautious around them. Those heroes that I say require practice, instead will be a living nightmare for you, but you will still be able to get some clutch fights in. And those tolerable heroes you see, well, it'll just take a lot of practice before you can effectively counter them. The ones that say easy to handle, yeah, those will become tolerable, in that they won't cause any problems alone for you, but once you start mixing them up, it will cause you issues. And finally, those quote-quote easy ult heroes. I think you will have to learn how to get your ult off of them first. For example, an experienced Wan Wan user will find it super easy to get their ultimate off of heroes like Eve, but if you're new, she might just be difficult to kill at first. Everything takes time, and I am most definitely not the best with WAN myself. I have good days, and I have bad days. Some days I can go in 1v5 versus a full set of difficult tier heroes, and get my ultimate, push back the enemies, and then win. And on other days, I can't even beat a simple Granger in lane. Just remember your mistakes, and try not to repeat them game after game. Remember how I just recently went into a bit of detail in this counter section to WAN with Phoveus and Lolita? I can do that for every single hero on the list. But, I mean, look at how long the video already is. Look at it! I would much rather do that in a separate video, but only if people really want to know exactly how to deal with every single hero using WAN. The higher the hero is on the counter list and the more complicated they are, the longer it's going to be of an explanation for that hero. The lower they are, the shorter. You get the idea. Anyway, I really don't expect people to, first of all, go crazy for this super long guide, or second of all, even want to know how to deal with every single hero using WAN. But I'm just letting you know, the possibility is there. Thanks for sticking to the end, guys. Expect more content soon, but nowhere near this level of detail and length. I kinda just let loose on the WAN guide, honestly. I'll see you later. Zero out.